Just greetings to everyone. My name is Phakazi Dau. I'm with the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, CANRAD. And today, I would say, taking into account that the university is celebrating both Diversity Month and both Women's Month, I think, the celebration of those two very important identities. One, being an identity that of women that has been deemed, for generations as incompetent, if you like, and lesser than. I think that's an important identity that we'll be discussing today. Subsequent to that of identity, taking into account our new brand and how even with the decolonization project in finding an educational knowledge that's quite contextual, it's quite important that to have as diverse thoughts and as diverse modes of learning, if you like, included in what we'd like to then be produced as the new way of learning and the new way of how we see knowledge. I think today in our discussion on intersectional transformation in our leadership spaces and how we navigate the workspace through a gendered lens, a very a mouthful, if you like, and I think a lot of people just grappling with understanding that entire topic in itself. I think we have very competent speakers today that will be delving into that subject. I also think that the house in itself is quite competent enough to just engage on the topic itself. I think just to give us just a brief into today, we'll just be looking at relationships amongst the various intersections that we have as women, or that we face as women in workplaces, to in particular in relation to gender, right? So first we'll be looking at the positions you hold in relation to gender, race, class, sexuality, and other social categories beyond those listed. And then secondly, I think in asking the question, what inequalities exist, right? But also for who those inequalities exist would be something quite interesting in our conversation today. Okay, so just to start off the program, I'd like to just welcome to the podium, just to give like a mini welcoming to all of you, the SRC Secretary in Communications, if I'm correct. Yes, Ms. Awongeva Baza to the podium. Here. So only that mic is working. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Phakazi. I like the fact that just this time around you got it right, that it's actually Secretary in Communication, because we tend to say it by saying we are Secretary Generals of the SRC, of which we are not. Simply because we are not in SRC but in interim structure, which is a task team. That's a name, by the way, that's been coming out. With all that being said, I would love to greet you all today. Standing before you, as she have said already, is Awongeva Baza. There's a reason that I keep on telling people my name, even if it have been said already. Like, if you could have realized that Uspokazi did say that let us welcome Awonke to come and make a welcoming. The reason behind that is because sometimes when you introduce your name by yourself, you kind of own yourself back. Now, you can say Awonke, with that it doesn't give any meaning, but when I tell you how to pronounce my name, that's when it makes sense, because I will then ask you don't know Awonke, then it will never make sense. But the minute I tell you that it is Awonke, then when you take it to a sentence, it gives a meaning. That is why in each and every space I always reintroduce myself, even though I have been introduced. Now, we are here today to talk about women. I'm going to put it out like that. Obviously, women are defined. You'd find this person defining who you are. You'd find that other person again defining who you are again. Now, again, when you take a stand as a woman to say, I am a woman, you are again owning up. So with those few words, I would really like to welcome you guys, to say feel free to be here. It's going to be a very quite interesting conversation. Before Nhlale Phansi, there's something I always love sharing with people. Someone once called me a patriarchal princess. I looked at her. The problem is that I'm a bad debater. I'm a bad debater because I reason with every opponent. I would understand why you hate me. I would try to understand why you think different from me. So that's why I say I'm a bad debater, Spoky. Now, this person called me a patriarchal princess. But obviously, we are bound to always redefine things by the way we see them. Then I sat there and go, okay, fine. Perhaps patriarch is quite a very broad thing, ne? Then I remember something that was once said to Mama Wam. I know a few know the story because I once shared it. My mom said one time, men are very powerful. A man can come to you, you don't like him, you hate him, you don't even see something that's handsome about him. But because they are so influential and very powerful, they will influence you to like them back. All of a sudden, you are in love with this guy that you never even thought that you would ever fall in love with. Mamelake, the very same guy who made you as a woman to fall in love with him is the very same guy who can cheat on you with your best friend. Then again, implant hate on you as a woman. Now, that's when I saw that sometimes patriarchy is really broad, like it goes beyond. Again, my mom once said, but we keep on saying we're given spaces, ne? A man would come and say, no, let women lead. We believe in this thing. No, we want you to go there. But my mom was saying, there's always a question of capacity, which is, by the way, a very sensitive thing because people tend to ask the question that why do we, when we talk about women in leadership, we always bring up capacity? I'm going to stand to be unpopular today and say sometimes those conversations that we run away from, the one where we question about capacity of women, are actually conversations that we need to look onto. So that, because as izinto, they need to be islonda ukuze siphole kufuneka usixabule. You don't just wrap it over. Because this is what happened when a man with so much power, again, say, no, Spoky, you must lead. Fine, you come as well, I am told that I must lead by a group of men who just told me to lead. Now I'm in the SRC as, let's say, the president, God forbid, as the president of the SRC. Now I'm here. Now, when push comes, where am I going to ask for advice? Isn't it the very same man whom said, no, we'll go and lead? I will go back to the very same man and say, okay, I don't know what to do now, blah, 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 blah. Then you'd find out that you are no longer doing beyond your capacity, but rather you are pushing an agenda of a man. That's when I redefined patriarchal princess that I was said to be. I'm not about London. That's when I redefined to say, perhaps sometimes patriarchal princesses are actually those people who are forced by men to lead, simply because they we all know that we are coming from the past where women were not allowed to lead. Ne? They are busy wanting to be political correct now by pushing women to come and lead. Ne? Now, you are there, you are the face, you don't know what to do in the space of men. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to go back to the very same men who will give you the advice to say, no, do A and B and C. Don't do this, don't do that. So when we talk about women and them getting into spaces of leadership, getting into spaces of a workplace, we need to be very robust, if I can say. We need not to brush over some other things. We need to go deep, because that's basically what will change the status quo. We cannot always take the shortcut when we want to solve the status quo. Kalomazwi, thank you guys for coming, and I would like to welcome you. Enjoy yourself. I would say take out ijacket zenu, but it's cold, so relax and engage. Enkosi kakhulu.
Thank you so much, Ms. Babaza. I think quite important from your welcoming is how you speak about the importance of giving meaning to something, right? Giving meaning to your name, giving meaning to the position that you hold, or the positions that we hold as previously and currently disadvantaged bodies. I think that's quite an interesting responsibility that you place on us. The second thing that you also mentioned is how it's quite important for us as women to stand up and to own up, right? And to show initiative and occupy spaces where we would not necessarily would have been would have had access to, for lack of a better word. And then quite interesting is how you mentioned the issue of competence, of which, Plato and Aristotle years ago would have argued that women are irrational beings. They would have had philosophical evidence to support the fact that women are by nature sub-men. And in order for you to be seen as a rational being, Plato and Aristotle would argue that you'd have to be dead and then born again and become a man in order to be deemed as a rational being. Well, thank God that's not the conversation, and that's not how we see society today. All right. So I think I want to jump right straight into the conversation. Our speakers look very busy. I think they're both just deep in thought pertaining to the topic, which is not entirely a bad thing. I also just think that they'd leave a lot for us to engage, and B, just a lot for us to take back after the discussion, but then let me not dictate it, right? I'm going to introduce the doctor first, and doctor, you can join me here if you'd like. Okay, perfect. So Dr. Babalwa Magoqwana is currently a senior lecturer in sociology, anthropology, inclusive of history at the now Nelson Mandela University. She teaches on development and underdevelopment, social research, sociology of organizations and social theory. She's the current South African Sociological Association president. She is part of the Food Research Group under Institute for the Humanities and Social Science BRICS program. Her current research interests are gender, intergenerationality, leadership, African languages as source of knowledge. Here. And to introduce Ms. Hlomela Bucwa, who hails from Port Elizabeth. She's currently doing a final year in law at the Nelson Mandela University, with the hope that she will one day become a human rights advocate. In 2015, she served as the first female SRC president of then NMMU, and as the Democratic Alliance Student Organization caucus leader. Though this was a huge achievement to many for her, her greatest achievement was raising 9.8 million for financially needy students, and to ensure that no student who is academically deserving is excluded because of finances. Hlomela is currently South Africa's youngest sworn member of parliament. Here. Do you want to join the doc as well? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So you can just use this mic, doc, because only this one works, and I'll just move out for you. Okay.
You're gonna tell me when I've got 2
Yes.
minutes left, eh?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah?
That's
Okay. Hopefully I won't have to come and tap you, doc.
no, don't worry.
Great.
It's very short. Molweni. Yo, hey. Awunzima nombuliso na betina. Okay, I'm basically going to talk about some of the thoughts that I've been struggling with lately, you know. So basically this platform is basically sharing some of my current contradictions and meanings of women representation in our institutions. So I'm grappling with the meanings of representation, given that it's a Women's Month, or given only 1 month in a year. Thank God. We should be very grateful for that. But I'm sure some of you know me, I've been talking in many student gatherings and staff gatherings, but the narrative that seems to be kind of trending, especially in NMMU, with the specific spaces that I've been, have been about, you know, women need to be bold to deal with gender-based violence. Okay, women need to be louder. Women must grab the opportunities that are given to them. And also, women must be ambitious. This has been the narrative. And in several times, I had to stand up and be like, okay, sorry, but there's an institutional culture here that we need to talk about. Okay, so this paper, in a way, looks at the institutional cultures in our public spaces and the positions in which women are leading. So I know I was supposed to present on gender, workplace, intersectionality. I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about that. Sorry to disappoint you. As I said to you, I'll be trying to have a conversation around the meanings and the contradictions of women leadership, especially in the public spaces. So, when we talk of women leadership in South Africa, specifically when we talk about the Women's Month, we tend to focus on statistics. We have more than 42% of our women in parliament. South Africa is one of the top 10 countries with most women in parliament. We have 14% of our VCs as women. To someone who's coming from Mars or any other planet, this is quite an achievement. This is something that we should all be celebrating. Of course, we should be celebrating representation. And SADC, especially Rwanda, is one of the places with greatest number of women parliamentarians. So, but I urge you to look closely in the statistics. I want to challenge you to examine the meanings of these statistics. What is the essence of having equal representation? Why do we say we want 50% women and 50% men in our institutions, whether it's institutions of higher learning, whether it's our government institutions, whether it's our corporate institutions. What does it mean? We have seen, my problem is that given the number of women that we have in parliament and all of that, we have seen women leaders, especially politically in South Africa, defending the indefensible. We have seen women defending colonialism, which is something that I don't think anyone can imagine in defending in a white supremacist society. We have seen women defending sexual violence. Women saying, actually, there is a political conspiracy here. Can we just leave this one and focus on the others? We have seen women celebrating and ululating for a rapist. Okay? So, this is why I'm struggling to say, what does it then mean to have a greater women representation? Should we want a particular kind of a woman leader? If we are saying then, we want more black vice chancellors, I'm making an example. What does that mean? What does that mean to have more women? Because unless we talk about these characteristics that we are hoping that women leaders can bring in our public spaces, we might as well have 100% male leadership. Unfortunately. If we are going to have women perpetuating sexist cultures in our institutions, we might as well have more men in our institutions. Recently, in an article penned down by Lindiwe Sisulu, she says that she talks about the conscience. She refers to the people's conscience, the leadership. That is the people's conscience. I like that. She says that we need a new leadership in a way within our party that can speak to the people's conscience. But I then asked myself, do we expect women to be isazela of the masculine institutional systems? What does it mean for a woman to be isazela, a conscience? The expectation for women to be isazela of the male masculine institutional cultures seem to be repeated as well by our former public protector, Madonze. She says that her role, she interpreted her role as a public protector as that of uMakhadzi. And then she says uMakhadzi enhances the voice is supposed to be that aunt in Bavenda female spiritual leader, who's supposed to be a non-political figure who serves as a buffer between the ruler and the people, and who enhances the voice of the people while serving as the king's eyes, ears, and conscience. So, there's something that we are getting to now. A woman's characteristics, it seems like, from these two women, it has to include isazela, one of the characteristics, conscience, which is different from political consciousness. We know that conscience, according to Kondlo, is different from political consciousness. As Biko said, consciousness refers to the attitude of the mind, and conscience refers to the orientation of the heart. Okay, the division of labor again. But we also know that isazela is not just a learned behavior like a political consciousness. There's no book for isazela. You don't go to the library and be like, I'm looking for a book on conscience. How to read conscience. There's no theory on conscience. Kondla goes on to say, isazela is a form of spiritual self-awareness. So there's something spiritual about isazela, which makes umntu accountable to the broader public. So there is something spiritual about the conscience that goes beyond the egoistic self, which then speaks to the ethics of accountability. So it's not about you as a leader, it's about other people. That's why amaXhosa azothi isazela siyamaka umntu. Conscience maketh a person. But also amaXhosa talks about isazela esiphilayo nesazela esifileyo. A living conscience and a dead conscience. But how does having this spiritual awareness help us in our leadership? This depth of ethical being or accountability seems to translate to the saying of umntu ayingomntu. Okay? We do know that we have a saying in isiXhosa that says that human being is not human. I know it doesn't make sense in English. It will never make sense. English is very binary. English is not helping sometimes when you want to speak to the questions of isintu. Okay? So, when you're saying that someone has got a death of conscience, this has been a repeated kind of situation when you go and visit. For example, when I go back to the rural areas and trying to understand how people are thinking of the political atmosphere in South Africa, people will be like, you, like that, akana sazela. Who? That man has no conscience. His conscience is dead whenever they're referring to our political leadership. So, when then we're saying that someone has got a death of consciousness, what does that mean in ngesintu? Does it mean that person is still alive? Ngumntu lamntu? Okay? It's up to you. But then, when I was looking at women's leadership, the question for me was, how do they become, obomama, become isazela, when the very women themselves are driven by ambitious and aspirations of the masculine, racialized, classist power structures? This is why Ifeoma Madume argues in referring to the token women with selfish ambitions who occupy leadership positions in masculine power structures. She says, referring to one of the women that she was quoting, she became a male daughter in gender terms. She will be in a man's house, respond to masculine jokes, tolerate or even join in male hi-hi-o laughter, as we can all see these days on television screening of parliamentary performance, obey and execute male-decided policies. She will in fact operating in a male-generated and gendered power system. So, how do we then expect So these are the contradictions that I'm thinking about. That we're sending women to have this kind of isazela, to be the conscience, the heart of our institutions. But, as Amajuma says here, they become part of the sexist jokes of our institutions. They become part of those who sign laws that are trying to reverse abortion, for example. They become part of these cultures because they are celebrating their class power in these spaces. So that is one aspect that has been coming up the most. Women as isazela, the conscience. So we can see that the numbers, in a way, they don't really affect the institutional cultures in which these women inhabit, unfortunately. Because those women themselves, they are enjoying the class power of the masculine cultures. On the other hand, Hlomela Steady, who studied women and leadership in West Africa, provides a very comprehensive study on women's leadership in West Africa and argues for the women's leadership that is based on ethos of motherhood and the values conveyed by motherhood. She says the concept of motherhood and leadership is not limited to reproductive and nurturing roles in households, but reflects the normative values and humanistic ideologies that embrace notions of preservations of past, present, and future generations, prosperity and well-being of society as a whole, and the promotion of equality, peace, and justice. It is also viewed as a metaphor for humanizing the state. So this is another aspect of this particular kind of leadership of women. She conducted a research in West Africa, in Guinea, the Asante Queen Mothers of Ghana, Sierra Leone, and I forget the fourth country, but my West African friend will help me there. So she says that when we talk about women's leadership, there is something that we fail to talk about, which is the mothering ethos that they're supposed to bring in. And she says we must note this is about not their reproductive role of mothering, because people tend to think that mothering is gendered. According to Oyewumi, mothering is not gendered. It is the framework of thinking. It is the value system. Okay? The value system of sacrifice, the value system of of caring and all of that. It is not a gendered approach to state leadership. But we know that the colonial power structures have always been male. So how do we then, given the history of the colonial structures that have disrupted these African societies, how do we then go back to what Hlomela Steady suggests as centering motherhood in our African women's leadership characteristics, and therefore affect the institutional cultures that seem not to recognize the woman's being and its existence in these structures. Steady speaks of the nature and ethos of organizing African leadership in general, based on the African matriarchal heritage that we have. She says we must step on in the systems where we had matriarchs as our leaders, the parallel leadership that we had pre-colonial Africa, and which continues in certain parts of West Africa. That's what she suggests. So, in trying to read the meanings of representation, we need to be aware that having women in leadership positions does not necessarily translate into gender equality or advancement of the majority of women. We have to dig deep into our African patriarchal histories and feed our political consciousness with spirituality and reality that defines the soul of African societies. If we are to be isazela in our representation, it means we also need to guard against any forms of exclusions that tend to crop up when we include others. Again, the question here that I'm trying to speak to is more than empowerment. I am trying to provide a gender analysis of women that are wielding power structures in these, are wielding power in these masculine structures, as Ify Amadume suggested. So I do think that we do have a duty to understand empowerment of women beyond putting them in positions, but what is it that they bring in those institutions? Thank you very much.
Can I just get the main seat? It's not really my fault.
Okay.
Thank you, Doc. I think just some key elements just from your speech there, when you speak about African matriarchal heritage, and just to tap into your research interest, I'm just gonna pose a question that you can just answer later during the Q&A session. Because I myself do some study on African feminism and so forth, and it's very rare for you to find, when you study that, instances where women have overthrown other women who have been in particular positions of power. It's very rare where you see that clash of when you look at conflicts and wars and so forth. It's very rare where it's women to women, indicating that women traditionally wouldn't have been in those spaces. So women in this instance would have to be overthrowing men. Right? Am I making sense? Okay, cool.
That's fine.
And then the second one that I just want to pose to you is what Ananya Roy, in a TED talk, she talks about something called the don't close the door policy, where in institutions of higher learning, for example, so I'm a student and I have a particular lecturer that I want to engage, obviously for academic purposes, and it's a male lecturer. And I want to go visit his office, but then I'm conflicted whether to close the door or not because of the perception that will come out of it when I come out of that room. Often you find other academics within that space advising you to not close the door. And it speaks to what you're telling, where often it's either you become the different one and you just become odd, or you get assimilated into that masculine space and that masculine culture. So how do you think that we can break out of that? And what has been your experience with students who would like to have intimate relationships with their lecturers, not intimate in a sexual way, intimate in an academic way, but cannot because of the gender? Yeah. Am I making? Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. There you go. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you guys look very sad. And I'm not a speaker who sits down when they speak. I genuinely stand up and address. I know. But you found me in a very difficult time. You found me in a very difficult time. A critical point in life where you realize that it doesn't matter how many people perceive you to be strong. It does not matter the obstacles that you've surpassed. the fact of the matter is that we live in a society in which when you are a female, you must work 10 times harder. When you're a black person, you must work 10 times harder to prove yourself. When you're a young person, you must work double. And now I'm a black, young female. You can only imagine. And so I appreciate the fact that you got in academia to give background and input. I was sitting today, actually. I'm not gonna be very long because I think we need to have a very critical discussion and an honest conversation. And so my question to myself was that why is that if you are a woman in a position of leadership or power, automatically we presume that you're a feminist? Why is there an expectation that I must empower other women? I simply had ambitions to want to lead and become a CEO of a company. I just wanted to represent the people of South Africa and make laws. What does that have to do with the next female? It's a question I want us to deliberate on. I consider myself a feminist. Don't be scared. I believe in empowering young people, empowering black people, empowering women in society holistically. But it's a question that we need to deliberate upon. Because when we speak about women in leadership, and I speak from experience, the only criticism I received when I was SRC president is that I do not address women issues. And so was I elected to address women issues or to address student issues? Colleagues, let me firstly begin by asking whether our plight is to seek access into spaces or that our womanhood should not determine our capacity and capabilities. Society's expectation of women influences how we are perceived or treated in a space. Do we therefore choose to educate society about women's competency and our capability, or do we challenge the systems and policies that are in place? And so, do we essentially address the betterment of women's health in the spaces, or do we address the ill health between men and women? Colleagues, in deciding how we proceed, let's find sustainable solutions. Because in the quest to empower the female, the man should not become disempowered. We ought to find a balance and hold each other. So if you're going to become Isazela or Mbogoto, you need to be very conscious of what you mean by that. I had a difficult task and I spoke to Spogazi about the topic itself. And I was hoping Doc would touch on it, but she said, we must go study sociology 101. Then we'll understand it. But I sat down and I did a bit of research to understand, firstly, the very word intersectional. What does it mean? And so, through my research, it proposes that all aspects of one identity need to be examined as simultaneously interacting with each other and affecting one's privilege and perception in society. And that these facets of identity cannot be simply observed separately. As such, it is not simply to view my personal identity, but rather the overarching analysis of the power of hierarchies present with identities. There was a present discussion when this was discussed on who is more privileged in society. And there was a graph made, and of course the black woman was there at the bottom. And I want to understand, why is that? And I'm hoping, Doc, you'll be able to assist. But when we look at what intersectional, this hypothesis suggests that a lot of issues in society are not addressed because we look at and identify an individual problem. So we say that women are not leading and we open the doors of access, but never find the root cause of the problem itself. Because the fact of the matter is that you can state that no, we've addressed inequality. Correct? And many times we believe that we've addressed these issues through access. So society makes us believe that opening the doors, we would have addressed our issues. And I love the fact that we're here today, and many of us were in Fees Must Fall 2015. Now, institutions of higher learning have opened the doors, but the fact of the matter is that you must qualify to enter university. You must have funding to get to varsity, and you must pass and sustain yourself. Are we together? The issue we wanted to address was to educate our society, to address inequality, and therefore we've opened the doors of access. But the fact is you must still have certain criteria to be met. And so we feed off the misconception that because you have a freedom of choice, we can enter into a profession, because there are no laws restricting us, then as women we have no excuses why we are not in corporate, why we are not leading or occupy positions of power. We believe that once we've entered these spaces, then a few women who lead have dismantled patriarchy. And that's a fact. Because Bucwa was SRC president in 2015, and she was a female, patriarchy is gone. We don't have issues. And I love the point that to place people simply to fill in a quota does not address the fundamental problem. And so allow me to make us as women very uncomfortable right now. 2 days ago, I read a quote, and I'm going to reiterate it to you. It says the overwhelming majority of women accept patriarchy unquestioningly and even protect it, working out the resultant frustrations not against men, but primarily against themselves, in their competition for men as sons, lovers, and husbands. Traditionally, the violated wife bides her time and offloads her built-in aggression on her daughter-in-law, so men dominate women through the agency of women themselves. This is said by Winnie Mandela. She was not a bitter old woman at the time. She's happily married with kids, has a good place in society, but she says we are used as agency against ourselves. And I love the fact that she argues that, and it brought to mind then what does it mean? And indeed today we find women defending unjust and inhumane acts against other women. A person leaves their country and comes to South Africa, beats up a young woman and leaves her sons. And we're silent. I mean, if I was a parent, I'm not a parent, surely I would beat my own child who is the problem and not someone else's child. And so we expected as well, when you find ourselves in these spaces, to lose our femininity. The fact that I'm wearing a dress and high heels is a problem. The fact that I put on makeup makes me less of a strong-willed woman than the next. And so when we are emotional in a boardroom, it's seen as a problem because you're a woman. That's how you guys react. And so you must laugh when someone says, ah man, don't be, excuse my language, a pussy. It is us who laugh, as if there's something wrong with the very thing that gives birth and produces life. So let's come to South African politics, where I currently find myself. There's currently a question whether South Africa is ready for a female president. Why is that a question? There was an analysis done with 3 candidates from the governing party, the 3 potential female candidates. There was no analysis done on the men. This suggests that there is no space for all 3 of them, that they must compete amongst each other and only one of them must emerge and compete against the men. Surely the question should be, what kind of a president are we looking for, considering the status quo of South Africa? Fundamentally, colleagues, I am a firm believer that you don't have to be poor to advocate for the poor. You don't need to be black to fight for human rights and oppression of black people. You don't need to be female to advocate for women's rights, for these are human rights after all. But you ought to be critical on who speaks on our behalf, lest you be advocated for by our very own oppressor. We must watch carefully those who bring us a gender quota. And I'm inspired by the words of Justice Ruth in America. And she says, when I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough women in the bench? I say, when there are 9. People are shocked. But they'd never been shocked when there were 9 men sitting in a bench. And so in the Constitutional Court, there are 11 judges. What would be so wrong with having 11 female judges sitting up there when for more than a decade we had men only sitting in that bench? It's uncomfortable conversations we need to have, but effectively the point is to find the root cause of the issues and to understand that us as females must not be subjected or consider ourselves as victims. There's nothing wrong with being born a female. There's nothing wrong with being a tomboy who's raised by a father like myself, who grew up with no idea that I would become an MP and inspire young females. But there's equally nothing wrong with a female who grew up playing with baby dolls and becomes a housewife. She's no less of a powerful woman than the one who's a CEO or president of the country. And so, perhaps I might be politically incorrect for my part on this one. But I always draw reference to my experience as a young person because I have not studied what it means to be a female. I've not studied politics and the issues of society, but I've simply seen and experienced them. And so I always remember when I was going to become an SRC president, the question was not your gender. Everyone within the room, and Tando is here and Bax and Naledi as well, they will tell you simply based on who is best fitted for that position. It was not your ambition, it was not your gender, your color of skin, but who was best fitted to lead students in that position. And so I worry now today in our SRC constitutions we want to enforce, and perhaps I need to be assisted with this debate of a 50% quota. Because it's not about the quota, it's about the environment you create within your own organization, within your own structures, for women to be able to lead. Even how we convene and communicate with ourselves. In this very institution, we've had deputy presidents, secretary generals, SRC presidents, leading students. They didn't need a gender quota to empower them because we understood as society and organizations that this person is very fit and capable to serve. Are we together? And so it brings me to bear then that we are not mentally emancipated as women ourselves firstly. We underestimate our own capabilities. And that's why you find that even in our workspaces, if it's me and Spogazi Dawo, I will argue with Spogazi because I believe she's my only competition. And not because it's a healthy competition, but because we are scared and think we're unequal or incapable to do the job that a man can. Lastly, colleagues, it's important for us to stop having talk shows. Let's stop having Women's Day events and speaking and having dialogues each and every year. It's good to debate, it's good to engage. But outside of these platforms, what are we doing to address the issues? Because we will come here and engage and speak for 40 minutes, a person is giving a preamble in the Constitution. But they exit that door. It is us who suppress the very women we're advocating for. The talk shows must end, but as society we need to start acting. And it's not going to be our task simply as women are in positions of power or leading or in politics, but each and every one of us have a critical role to play in that struggle. And that's why many of our issues as young people, we are never successful. Our struggles are not, we will never be like the youth of 1976 because we fail to look at the bigger picture and have one common purpose. We fail to have one common purpose. This institution, the last time I spoke here was a few weeks ago. It was called NMMU and people say it's a tongue twister, etc. You can change the name, but if the values remain the same, if the institutional culture is the same, if the people are the same, Dr. Allen, we are not going anywhere. It must not simply be a name thing, but action it out. And so I hope we will have robust engagements. I try to not belong because their main experience is in politics. And I think our role here was not to expose how much we know and how much we don't know, but to give an overview of what we've seen, studied, and experienced. And hopefully we'll get proposed solutions from each and every one of us sitting here, and how do we critically address these issues that we find. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Hlomela. I'm just going to pose also just a mini question. So I'm doing this because based on these speeches, I don't think I'm going to get an opportunity to ask questions, so I'm doing it now so that I can at least be at peace before I open it to the floor, okay? So quite interesting, you talk about how we have these imposed burdens on us because of the bodies we carry, right? And sometimes because of the skin you carry, actually, right? Whereas when you occupy a particular position, people will expect you to advocate for certain things because you represent a particular thing. Because we see things through a polarized lens, right? It's either black or white, there's no gray area. Great. So the question then I want to ask is then, how do you deal with that contradiction where, A, you are trying to then own your own identity, that of arguably in the context of your speech, not addressing certain things because of the body you carry, but because you want to, or because that's not the mandate, right? Vis-a-vis someone saying you are betraying the essence of who you are by not addressing a particular thing because of the skin and the body that you carry. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so Doc, I don't know if you have already like the answer for that other question, or if I should just open it to the house and then we'll just do it as a collective.
Open.
All right, so I'm going to take the first 4 hands because I'm adding my questions as like plus ones. Okay, all right, the first 4 hands, if there are any. I'll take comments and questions. Please limit it to 3 minutes. Yeah, I'll cut you after 3 minutes, okay? It's just so that we can have another round as well. Okay, so I see this one hand over there. Are there any comments? Are there any thoughts? Okay, 2 questions, points of information, things our speakers have missed, maybe I've missed as well. Okay, so we only have 2 hands. For now. Yep, okay, all right. Oh, for now. Okay, so we'll take the first hand at the back. Marco, do you need me to wait for you a little bit?
2 6, I'm actually ready, so yeah, that's fine.
Just hold on a second.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Everyone can hear because my mic is not working. And we can hear you.
I'm ready.
Just try and project it just a little bit more, hey? Thank you so much, Rio. Yeah?
Hello, Nana.
Siyabulela with the speeches, well thought out. My name is Vuyo Chingila, renowned feminist. I believe in black radical intersectional feminism. So I'll be speaking from that viewpoint. The first thing I found very, and it's an important conversation to have because most people that are put in a certain position are always burdened with responsibility, you know? Because you don't have a duty as a woman to be feminist. Being feminist is a choice. And in fact, activism is work. It's exhausting, mentally and otherwise, emotionally. So it's a choice that one has to make. But okay, in fact, I am going to advocate for this and that. Because there's nobody who ever sees a black person in power and asks themselves, why aren't they empowering other black people? Okwesibini would be that whether you choose to be feminist or not, feminism gets to benefit everyone. Because dismantling patriarchy and destroying patriarchy, or the white cis heterosexual system, would be beneficial for everyone who is subservient to that. So whether you choose to advocate or not, you stand to benefit anyway. Thirdly, on gender quota, I remember we had the summit and we spent a lot of time, you know, on this gender quota question on whether to have a gender quota or not, or if we are having it. and there was a question of competency to numbers. And it's a difficult conversation to have because when it comes to men, and as you've mentioned that we've had men leading, and in fact they are subpar and mediocre and basic, and nobody ever questioned that. And for me, I was like, okay, fine, maybe we shouldn't put a number to it. But if we should put a number to it, then it should be 90%. Because to put a 50% quota is assuming that men and women are at an equal space, which is a lie, which is a blatant lie. If then we are going to put a gender quota to it, let us be radical about it. Let us show then that actually women need to take up space because women are more than capable. The fifth point, and what Bucwa said, on the whole, women are jealous of each other and we're always competition to each other. One thing we always forget is that black women are the victims here. We are dealing with probably centuries worth of patriarchy. So now that we are woke, we expect that people are clear on politics is unfair. And if ever we're going to question and judge and check people, we should be more patient to the person who is at the bottom of the pyramid, because that's the person who's experienced the most oppression. If we're thinking about it, intersectionality, yes. I mean, we're talking about a black, say for an example myself, a black, queer, poor woman who now experiences all these oppressions and now has to somehow unlearn and in 2 years be able to, be this person who is clear on everything. It's very unfair, especially for women. Women need to be more patient to other women. Of course, you won't have time for men, you won't have time for white people, you won't have time for exactly. But let's be more patient to each other so that we make the unlearning and relearning process plausible. We need to be a safety net to each other. And goes.
Okay, and then one Mandela.
Hey everyone. I won't be long because CC, you put many things I wanted to say very beautifully. But I think I'll start by, I'll say I've always wished that, especially as women, we would not necessarily be given a space, but rather occupy a space where it's just us women and for women, and deliberate and engage on women issues. Because I think, like what Doc said, there are many meanings that we need to come to terms with. And I think, especially women, there are many struggles that even we women ourselves have not had a chance to contextualize. That's why even in the space where we discuss, women-related issues, we will have solutions that are very, we're not satisfied with as women, especially with efforts that are put into implementing the very solutions. So I think I'm grateful that we have pleasant men in this room, but I'd rather we really look into having a conversation around issues that affect women so that women can have their own stance when society is then invited into an inclusive conversation. Then we at least as women know where we stand. Because I think especially women of our generation, we have so many issues we have to deal with that we pick and choose and we throw away and we just sort of want to find where we can stand. Just with that note passed on. Also just a note to our brothers here. I'm going to read something that was written by a doctor whose name I forgot. So it's somebody who studied something like an academia. She says men and women are actually more physically similar than we are different. But there are a few key distinctions in our physiques, and some of them are to suit each sex for the role it plays in reproduction, while others exist to help us tell each other apart and help in our mutual attraction. And this is where it says the distinction ends. So this is where physical ability or capability or any sort plays a role. However, in anything that requires intellectual capacity, gender determines nothing. I think that's one thing that all men need to understand, that yes, we are arguing the concept of access for women in institutions, opportunities and all of these things, but more than anything, we want you to understand that we want the whole system to change, because the system itself does not allow women to advance. So it's not the door that we want you to open, but rather we want the environment to change and be conducive for a woman to be able to advance. So just a note to the brothers. And just to my sisters, I think Ms. Bucwa put it very bluntly that there are conversations that are very uncomfortable that we need to have amongst ourselves. Hence I said in a space where it's just us, lest we are taken advantage of. So some of the questions I want us to ask is, there are many stereotypes that are placed on women. If you are emotional in a meeting, you are, less radical, you are fragile, you're not eligible to lead, and if you don't show any emotion, you're not feminine, you don't have a woman touch, you cannot nurture, you cannot do all of these things. So it's like you're expected to be suitable both in a workplace and in a home, which society has expected us to serve differently in. You have to be emotional for home, and you have to be less emotional for the workplace. I'll be done just now. So I think even as women, there are conversations we need to have amongst ourselves, but can it start with just us? We'll include men when we tell them of solutions we need and roles they can play if they want to. Rather, we don't leave them. Just inclusive South Africa.
I've got 4 questions. Okay. Okay. I'm noting them with you, so. Okay. Do we just have one more excited individual that'd like to share? No? I would have to, unfortunately, the second round. Okay, so we're just going to take one more. Is that fine? Okay, cool. No, we can take it now. Sorry. I'll move this one. Okay, you have 3 minutes.
I'm hearing the conversation regarding the moving women into spaces that were previously not designed with them in mind, and the contradiction that comes with whether or not that space is supposed to be a unique platform or that space is supposed to be a space where women exercise a certain amount of femininity or sprinkle some kind of other thing into a particular space. When we look at the political space, then when we're looking at that, do you think that then, if you're saying that you should be taken as an individual and the context of being a woman should be removed from it and your capacity be determined purely by what you contribute, is it then fair to say that the titles of black, of woman, of first female president are still things that you need to put ahead of you in an announcement? Or remove those, and then we can use a yardstick that is similar to a middle ground and not necessarily having a masculine reference point. Secondly, when Dr. Magoqwana spoke about changing the culture and saying that numerical representation doesn't equal to a change in culture, usually when there's a 50-50 in a particular group, the culture can be influenced by both sides. So are we then answering the one question or answering this particular argument with your address in saying that 50-50 gender quota doesn't speak to whether the capacity of a woman is measured by whether or not she's female or the conscience that she brings into the space, but that the conscience itself changes the space and the climate of political environments and the spaces that men were previously dominating to then make space for women in the future. So the woman becomes then a space invader initially to start adjusting and making a reimagined environment where there's a middle ground instead of a masculine or feminine reference point on a particular continuum of relationship.
That's okay for you to respond? No, that's fine.
Okay, perfect.
I think there are curriculum questions here. Seriously. There are serious curriculum questions that we need to deal with. Okay, and I'm really offering, next term I'll have a semi-free term so that we can start with the basics. Basics in terms of different systems of society. Okay? So that we don't come here in this space and start talking about, sure, okay. But anyway, so there is a curriculum question that we need to address in NMMU, and I've been saying this for some time, that our curriculum has not caught up with what is happening with the rest of the continent and also with what the students have been trying to say. We are still caught up with some, where the black household is not the center of your thinking. Once you put umtu and your vernacular in the center of your thinking and you stop these, I've been saying this, luckily, I think the guys are familiar with my thinking. I've been saying to the guys, kanisuseni ezi political theories zenu zangaphandle. Can see what is it that as black people talk about when we talk about leadership? What does it mean? Since when did a woman in an African household become a powerless victim? When? If you look at the history, and then if we are to change the curriculum to actually be representative of our own daily realities and experiences, we would not be able to have some discussions, certain discussions here. Because it means you will know that your whatever feminism or whatever wokeness, whatever that you have, should start in your own household, your own grandmother. Umamako wenza njani izinto endlini? How is your own mother managing the budget in the household? How is your own grandmother teaching you the different ways of survival in society? So that we don't come here with a language that is somewhere disconnected to our own realities. So there is a curriculum question that I think we should insist on in NMMU. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves like so behind in other universities. But the second question is that it's not just here. It is also amongst the staff members. That is the saddest thing. The pull head down syndrome. Come on, guys. That was a 1960s debate. It is long gone. How women don't want other women to succeed. Okay. Who cares? We are talking about how to transform the institutional cultures, the value system, the practices of the institutions to reflect inclusively of women so that they don't have to fight with the Zambanelinye and therefore pull her down. It is so disappointing to come in an academic space and hear academic, especially women academics, talking about a pull her down syndrome. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the issue of if then you are sent to parliament as a woman, who are you representing if you're not representing other women? If you're saying that there is no point of me, I'm going there as an individual. If we're in a less equal society, in a more equal society, or where everyone can be an individual in that society, then you can go to parliament and say, I'm representing people. Unfortunately, in South Africa, we don't have that privilege. You are representing black, you are representing women, you are representing disabled, you are representing this and that and that. Those different categories. Because of the nature of power relations in society. So, to say that your leadership is about your capacity and leadership, it is quite concerning. Who is your legitimacy? How do you legitimize your leadership? Who do you account to as a leader? So, and also the last part that I want to talk to Nobube is that when you're saying that representation should not be the key thing, it means representation is important. It's important to have women. But also, we must not just end it there. We must take it a little bit further to see how do we then as women in those male-orientated or masculine cultures start influencing policies that can better reflect the realities of the majority of women. It is not just about we're saying that, okay, let's discard representation. That is not the point. We are saying it is important to have women, but But the women that we have there must be able to then speak to the realities of the majority of other women who are still very much caught up in poverty, experiencing sexual violence, who are racism as a domestic workers, and all of those things. So let us not pretend here as if we're in a perfect society. So it is a curriculum question, I understand, but I am offering basic class on social system. Thank you very much.
Just make sure you didn't leave anything out. Touching me on my.
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay, alright. Can we just get order in the house? Alright, thanks. Sorry, okay, let's.
Yeah, I think I'll just respond to your question, and I'll tie it in with the point made by Voya, and then I'll just respond to the last one. Look, I agree with you completely that being feminist is a choice. Fundamentally, as any decision to choose, perhaps that I want to follow a particular path and I'm convicted of a certain stance. And I alluded to the fact that you found me at a very critical time and a difficult time, because once you enter those spaces, particularly in politics, and I spoke about my trinity being a young black woman, you begin to understand that it's no longer about your own individualistic concerns, but the greater good of society. And I'll make an example. When I got into SRC president, right? Everyone said this is the first female president. And automatically there was that response, then you need to address and respond to female issues. And it's a fact that in society presently, we're not equal. There's an imbalance. And I'll bring an example now in Parliament, that when I sit and we deliberate on laws and policies, automatically the instinct arises that I am a young person, a black person who understands the struggles of young black children. So in the Higher Education Portfolio Committee, I speak from a point that has understood and has lived the experience of a young black child. And that instinct of representation taps in. Are we together? So I agree fully that the choice comes, but it becomes a burden because you understand then the issues of your own society. So now it's no longer a privilege for me to stand there and I think, okay, I like science and technology, so I'm going to be the science and technology portfolio committee and speak about innovation, as though I don't know there are children who do not have practical equipment to study physics and chemistry. So it happens automatically that because of where we are, and because of the fact that I come from a mother, and so I know how human settlements impacts, and when you pass a particular bill, what that will have on that community. So we'll know best when you sit in the municipality and say that people must now be billed for their water and electricity because you yourself once could never afford it. And so you come from a point that protects the very members of society while trying to also advance the greater good of others. Yeah. The last part of the titles. Look, I'm not one who's very fond on titles. Supervisor Dao will tell you how many times she asked me for my bio. I said, you know what I've done. It's not about what title I hold. And by the way, that's why I said, it's not about being in a position of power. All of us sitting here have a responsibility. It should not be that simply because I sit in parliament, the responsibility to serve young black children is upon my head and you don't have one. And that's why today we have a collapsing student representative council, because we think we simply elect individuals and the responsibility is based on them. And we as members of society, we can sit down. That's not true. You as women as well must end up in your own spaces. It cannot simply be a responsibility upon me because I'm elected. And so for me, don't bring a title. I always become disturbed. You are first black female president, as if that's something that should be praised. And then you was here for 10 years prior to UPE. And only 10 years later, you have a first black female. It's a problem. And so for me, it's an indictment when you mention those titles, that you're young politicians. Why could we never previously have young people stand up in parliament?
Because we've got elders at the age of 70 and ready to die, making laws that have an impact on us for the next 50 years. And that's a fact. So for them, a person thinks, I can loot and steal because they're not going to be here tomorrow. But if you're standing there as a young person, you understand I still have 30 years and young children to give birth to. So I must build a country that will become sustainable for future generations. And that's the premise that we come from. And so we must not sit, I believe it's not a kumbaya world. But also, I mentioned this, we are not victims, guys. And maybe I say that because I was raised by a father who was strong, so I never understood this thing of feeling sorry for yourself. I don't mention my story that I was poor, etc. Because it doesn't define us. It has a huge impact on what we are today, but it should not limit what we can be and what we can do for the rest of society.
Is there an appetite for more engagement, colleagues? No. Prof, I want to pause. I feel like you don't want to. Prof, oh Doc, sorry. Unless I'm speaking it into existence, that's also fine. I can do that. I want to ask. Yes, are there comments, colleagues? Yes. Okay, I see one. Okay, great. I see your hands. I just want to speak to one thing that I'm getting from both your responses, and the first one is in your paper, Doc. When you speak, you speak about these token women that now exist in these masculine spaces, and I asked a question a little bit about that, but I want to ask also relating to both your responses now. How then do we, and I'm sorry to put the burden on you, but perhaps if someone in the house has the answer, that would be great. How then do we, in addressing the decolonization project, respond to a rebirth of knowledge, right? Where we are not detached, as you make reference to that, to how one comes from a particular household where the behavior is this way. Now you're exposed to a particular thing, living at Zanati or Melody residence, and now you exist, as Azola would call, in a double consciousness, right? How do we then, in addressing the project, ensure that rebirth and that maintaining of what the true self is there? But then, in addition to speaking about the true self, what then is the true self, by the way? Because we don't have a lot written about that, A. Two, when you look at things such as patriarchy, it has been, it's such a system. It's entrenched. Hlomela speaks about how women bring each other down. You get annoyed by the bring each other down syndrome, right? The pull me down syndrome, but it's still there. And how do we ensure that in our rebirth we address that and rewrite history, if you like? Okay, cool. So I'll take the other contributions. Let me start there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll close with our 5. Okay, hold on. Let me just recount. Must I not recognize you? Yes, that's fine. You are number 2. Usisi, there's number 1 with the Maasai thingy, color thing. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6 over there, number 7. This is the last round, colleagues. Let's do this. Okay, cool. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you to the speakers. I guess my preoccupation is...
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Can you just try a little bit more?
Okay.
Yeah, I see.
I guess my preoccupation is mostly about the question of power and the attractiveness of one's proximity to power. In the sense that in South Africa's political culture currently, which is embodied in masculinity and the attractiveness of masculine power, particularly in politics
out in our country. It does not surprise me that we find women who are in the ANC Women's League who relish the proximity that they have to masculine power, which then does not incentivize any transformative agenda which places women at the center. Because in South Africa's political discourse, there is no incentive to prioritize women, because there is no direct power that comes from a political discourse which inherently centers women. And so it should not surprise us then when our president is, the president is on trial for raping a woman, and you see a gathering of political stalwarts who are women who galvanize around this particular representation of masculine power. Because there is no incentives to stand up and say, this man is a rapist. There's no power incentive in that. It is then not surprising again when you find the EFF emerge from a man who made remarks that Ufezega, how dare she claim rape when she asked for taxi fare, that you have again a gaggle of women that prop up this man and say this is the man that's going to take South Africa forward. Because again, there is no incentive to ensure, there's no incentive of women having serious dialogue and critiquing the very nature and the very construction of the masculinist nature in which South African politics moves. So I think for me it's dialogues like these that make me question, when do we get to the conversation of the attractiveness of masculinity for women? Because that is a serious question. The attractiveness of power and the masculine for women as well is a serious concern for me. Because I think that is when then we get to understand how is it that we have people like the ANC Women's League who still in 2017 do not see the incentive in gender in centering women in South Africa's political discourse. So I guess that's my question or comment to the speakers.
Yeah? Are you captured? Thank you so much. Yes.
First of all, I would like to say it would have been interesting to actually hear men actually contributing to such a topic. Because it might seem like we have nothing to say because we are men. Because some women said we're men, we shouldn't be part of the conversation. Yet we live in a society where men are the guys who are actually on top. What do we have to say as men being on top? Which is what women don't want to hear, being on top. So it's interesting that I think I should put it back to Honorable Hlomela for leading the topic in a certain direction. I think we limited ourselves when we referred to feminism being a black woman's struggle. Are you trying to say that black feminism struggles are the most intense type of feminist struggles? I mean, in this venue, we have many races, black, colored, white. Are you trying to say that these women do not have intense systems of struggle? Why are we separating the struggles as women, yet we are only fighting for the same struggle? To put down women, to actually put women on top. Are you trying to say a white woman, just because she's white, her feminism is much better than a black woman? No, that's the interesting conversation we would like to have. We want to hear the differences. Why is it this way? Are you trying to say we as black men are the main people who put women down because they're black, and white men are not doing the same thing? Are you trying to say that colored women do not have the same struggles as black women? I think it would be actually interesting to have such answers be put forward, because some of us want to know deeply about feminism, not limited to being a black woman.
Is no one going to? Oh no! All right. Colleagues, I just want to pose it to the House. Let us please just respect every speaker's contribution as different and as bold and controversial and could potentially get a beating from the Number three.
I'm number 4.
Was there someone else?
I'm number 4.
Okay.
I'm number 4.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's very interesting what my colleague have just said right now. To just to divulge on it, it was interesting what Naledi said, that women need to find space and occupy and actually discuss their own issues, right, without the men. But the question that I'm posing to the House right now is it the men that is the problem or the system that is the problem? Why I'm asking this is because centuries of oppression, we know our history, Tina, from Upper South Africa, right? The system was built for white male, right, to be in positions of power. And because of land reform and segregation of black people, black male were forced to move to cities to work, right? And women stayed at home to take care of the family. So they were, I don't want to say heads of the household, right? But they were acting as heads of the household, right? A male was just offering financial, whatever you want to call it. So from that perspective, is it because a black male also experiences oppression, right? So this thing, let's not be in a vacuum and be blind to the system that is being designed, because the system was not designed for everyone. It was not. The system was made to actually make us unequal to each other. There must be a power, there must be someone superior than the next person. And then it goes back to there are two types of leaders. It's either you are there as a transactional leader or a transformational one. Are you there to change the status quo, which is you're gonna be a transformational one? You wanna change the imbalances of the society? Or you are just there just to transact, to benefit as a leader from your follower, which means you're gonna use just what our government is doing now. Using the very same people that are poor to empower themselves. They are transactionals. Those are the kind of leaders that we don't need in our society. Now, my question is, if you can't empower yourselves and actually deal with your issues as women,
order in the House,
and deal with your issues as women, how do you understand men? Wait.
Colleagues, there's just closing statements. Your time is almost running out.
Okay. If you can't deal with your issues between you two guys, how do you expect men to actually try to come to your level and understand? Because wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to have that, please. Considerably, no final
so
statement.
Disrespectful.
Yes, that's fine. Sorry.
How do you expect the very same men that you say that they are ignorant to actually understand your struggles? Because you say, Musnina, that they don't understand, and hence you need to find your own space and occupy.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you so much. Okay. Colleagues, let's just please, I really don't want to be policing and asking for points of order all the time. I think we're all matured enough. I beg of you. Let's have the second last speaker. 3 minutes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much, Mama. I think mine is most of a comment and to the speakers and the conversation that has been happening in the House. I've been excited throughout because most of the things that you guys are saying are actually the things that most of the times I'm uncomfortable to say because I'm not in the environment. In fact, I'm always scared to be politically incorrect, if I may say. Dr. Magoqwana spoke about Inansika, females being cheerleaders. That's me saying that. I'm rephrasing it to that. But we then become cheerleaders of men. That is when it's jokes about females, then we get too excited and so forth. And Ms. Bucwa said something very powerful, saying we have long overdue conversations. I don't want to lie. If there's something that we are too good in, it's having conversations, having dialogues. We sit and talk about decolonization. We speak and talk about transformation and so forth and so forth. But the question is, when are we starting? Then it goes back to say, perhaps it's a good thing. Let me be patient. That's when I always caution myself, okay, no, relax, be patient. The mere fact that these conversations are happening, I must be excited because obviously we're a generation which is planning on the future. Because again, Doc said something about it's high time we really look onto the curriculum. Somebody once said, one way to control a country is to keep it uneducated. Obviously, you can control and manage on how things must be done. When you are checking with the curriculum that we are having in South Africa, you'd find out that we are actually being taught izinto that are not relevant to an African context. Now then, it comes back to question yourself about what kind of system the government is preparing us as the generation of today for the future. It goes as Obana. I'm really excited because us being the youth engaka gives a picture of abandana betu. We are going to have children, Tina, that we're going to be enforcing decolonization to them. We are a very conscious generation that, as much as the conversations say to zinga direction, but at least we are not silent. We are vocal. We want to proceed and to change. The cases where, because you found out that the things of Inansika, where you differentiate between a man and a woman, start at a very young age. Because that's the other thing I said. I wrote about a few days back, saying a society is expecting a man to be successful because it's a very thingy. If you are a girl, you grow up ugly. The only dream of every ugly girl is to one day to be beautiful. You grow up saying, I want to be beautiful. But funny enough, the only dream of every ugly guy is to one day be successful so that when they have money, they can buy all the happiness they want. Now, my question then comes to say, Mama, why is it? When are we going to then, as a society, see women, because currently we want a beautiful woman. The society wants a beautiful woman, but a successful male. When are we going to? So I'm there, Mama. Thank you.
Yes, I think then, no, you were the last one, don't worry. I just wanted to ask if anyone is conscious about where the attendance register is. Please let it circulate, sir. Thank you so much. Please ensure that your details are on the attendance register, guys. All right, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Poki. I think I'm more relieved now that there are no bouncers in the room, so I can freely speak. Dogs cannot sing a day to know because we're still undergraduates, although it is overdue. I wanted to speak on the issue of specifically the SRC constitution. We're in the verge of amending our constitution, and there was a big debate about women empowerment, specifically about a gender quota, which is 50%, whatever the case may be. So we had that conversation, obviously, and bearing in mind that SRC constitution, it is the one that is probably going to guide us for plus or minus 10 years until the other SRC wants to amend. So we are in a difficult conversation, especially when I was listening to you, Doc, plus Nomam Bucwa. So we are speaking about gender quota on how we can empower women. That was, I would say, our solution. 50% gender quota of SRC members, and that is how we're going to empower, right? Obviously, we understand that some things that we propose are politically motivated by our political organization, right? So now it comes back to how then can we empower ourselves? How can we empower ourselves by our own programs without being nest or without being told what to do on how to be empowered? Because the very same people that wants to empower us are the very same people that are oppressing. So we don't know whether that solution that you are giving us is rather oppressing us further than we think that you are empowering us. So we are on that issue. At the very same time, when you speak about the gender issue or women empowerment, we cannot then say there isn't an issue of empowering women or women are not in leadership or all these things. We then cannot run away from that debate. But I'm then conflicted, right? I'm conflicted on the basis of should we have a gender quota or have any gender quota or whatever. On the basis of if we find our space there, we are going to empower and all these things, or the debate of competency, right? Let us put women because they are competent and all these things. And my question is, how then can you then qualify by, okay, now this one is qualified or competent enough to be in the SRC, to be SRC president? Now, so I want to pose both on Doc, because when curriculum and then Utomsi knows this politically. How then can we tackle this issue of women empowerment when it comes to our SRC constitution? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We have one more hand before we. I do apologize. I'm very sorry. Very sorry. All right. 1 minute. 2 minutes.
Thank you. You know, I've been listening very attentively to all the inputs that have been made, and I just want to make a comment to say, in any space that you find yourself in, be tolerant to the even the most ignorant person, or even the one that doesn't understand things the most, because you've got an opportunity to win their understanding and educate them about your suffering. That's the first point that I wanted to make. And the reason why I say this is because, you know, there's a quote that says, be careful with people. Everyone is going through something. The gravity differs. The gravity of what people go through will always differ. Like a black young woman would differ from a black young man. That's something that you can't have two ways about. But everyone is going through something. And as I'm sitting here and I'm listening to the discussion, you know, Doc, you made comments about you need to give people basics in terms of sociology and understanding systems and you name them. You know, I was fortunate or unfortunate, you know, to study in this system that we have. I don't know what you call it. But you were taught that, you know, Alex, whoever will write a book about what Africa is and define what Africans are and how African democracy came about. You are told what African is. I don't know who even defined that word Africa to us. you know, and you have all these major questions, you know, and you grapple with answering them. You know, we talk about feminism as if it's a term that we came up with and we know it and we've defined it, we understand it, you know, but it's something that was taught to us, something we were taught in a system that today we still question. But let me come back to I was just making that as a pass-by comment, you know. Let me come to the topic at hand and what we're talking about. My understanding of women in leadership has never been a difficult concept to understand, let alone a concept that I think requires women to occupy a certain space, because it's a space they already own. And the reason why I say this is because, you know, when you read the history and you trace back the history, before men discovered hunting, women have always been the providers in the family. Because babephuma bahambe baye emasimini bayolima, babuye nokutya bapheke and they feed the family. Men then discovered hunting because inyama, and they believed now we're the head of the household. And the reason why I'm making this comment is because history is very important. When you drive a car, you've got rear mirrors, you've got a windscreen. It's good to always check on a glance, that's why it's small. Glance on the history, and then say, where to from here? Which is where I'm going. And I believe that the conversation we're having here today shouldn't just be a conversation about how do women navigate what is perceived to be masculine spaces, but how far more do women contribute to one another, to own themselves, to deliver or build a PlayStation 8 rather than looking at how can I occupy a PlayStation 4. Because our mentality is, how do we reach this certain level, rather than saying, how do we create a certain level that will be defined, controlled by us? And somebody is quite right. Yeah, I'm closing up. The thing is, there's a lot in my mind, but it's fine. I'm closing up. We've got a role to play as young men. We've got a role to play. There are minor things, not even going into leadership, there are minor things that contribute to us indirectly or directly oppressing, offending the other gender or sex. High-fiving each other when we've got 5 girlfriends, oh, it's cool, how are you doing that? And it's a cool thing to do, according to guys. If you are for instance, now people ask, yeah, you're the youngest black what counselor. And I say, sometimes you shouldn't be proud of something that shouldn't even be happening in the first place. Like saying I'm leading poor people and I'm proud to fight for poor people. I'm the first black this, I'm the first this. How do we get to a point whereby it's a norm that a woman is a president? It's a norm that a woman can create even a space of leadership that even men have never thought of in the years that have passed. And I think it's a situation that we're grappling with. And it's not going to take one individual. It's not going to take us sitting. I know a lot of people, I see a lot of faces here. We've been in spaces where people have been speaking and speaking for years. But if you tell them, or you ask them, what are you doing on the ground to make sure that the very same people that you're fighting for are empowered? They won't have an answer. They will say, but that one doesn't understand my struggle. What are you doing about that struggle? Because you find that there's only a certain portion of people that say, I am acting in this space. If you are in a corporate space, what are you doing in that corporate space? If you're in a political space, what are you doing in that political space? If you're in academia space, what are you doing in that academia space? Let us see the fruits of what we're discussing. Because if we talk and we're talk shops and we make contributions and we act smart and this one doesn't understand me, that one does understand me, or you're not grappling with this, we're not going to go anywhere. But practically, what are the solutions and what are we doing about those things that we're proposing? I think as young men, we need to be open-minded. We need to start understanding, where do women exactly come from? Like us as black people wanting to say, white people, you must understand where we come from. Going to all white boys school and you see a young white boy shouting at someone's father who's their driver is not the best sight to see. Same thing, you can't say, okay, from a man's perspective, this and that and this and you must be able to be open-minded enough to say, what are the struggles of that individual? Because they're going through something. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, fine. Should I go first
Are you
so that I
ready?
can close? Yeah. Okay, these are my just last few comments. When I say that there are certain basic things that we need to understand about society, I mean that the 2 hours that we have here are not enough for us to have a proper conversation. That's what I'm trying to say. We need more time to actually talk about each and everything that was mentioned here. For example, the idea of blackness that the guy mentioned there. It's Biko says it, okay? But it's a seminar on its own for someone who doesn't know the different categories and what it means. Do you get it? So that is what we mean when we say there is not enough time for us to start from the base. Hence, I said I am offering a time, so that we can start knowing about social systems and social structures. How are the social structures affecting our individual opportunities in society? How does race as a structure, how does class as a structure, how does gender as a structure, sexuality affect my opportunities in life? The fact that I am a black woman, this, that, how does that translate in me accessing opportunities compared to someone else? So those are the questions that we still need to grapple with as like those basic categories that we need to talk about for us to be able to have a proper conversation. That's what I meant. I think what you're referring to, Lihle, the attractiveness of masculine power, I think that you've nailed it. And unfortunately, there is no incentive, as you're saying, for a woman to center women issues. Because what is happening is that power in itself is classed. Power in itself is gendered. Power in itself is racialized. So that is, how do we then de-racialize power? How do we then speak to how do we do away with the notion in itself? But it exists anyway, so we can't do away with it. Hence I was suggesting towards the end of my talk that there are specific realities sometimes that we can access through our own African languages, and therefore decolonize, as you were suggesting earlier on. How do we access the structures of power that existed, that were beyond gender, race, and otherwise, that were based, for example, on seniority? So that's why I was saying that maybe our curriculum can start helping us in redefining certain spaces, because even the state in itself is an extension of these gendered, masculinized, and racialized senses of power. So no, I do agree with you. There is no incentive. Our whole institutions, they reward this kind of masculinized embodiment of power, unfortunately. Please, can we just note, I am not saying representation is not important. That is not what I was saying. I was saying that how do we then, your question, Lihle, how do we then turn around that representation to speak to the realities of the majority of women? Not that representation is not important in your SRC. It is important, but we must be able to use the representation to inform the policies that we make and change the kind of culture that we have in those spaces. So I'm not saying representation is not important. Please do not misunderstand me. Okay, I think that's more or less what I wanted to say. Or in terms of decolonization, I think as long as we're still having a conversation about curriculum, as long as we have spaces whereby we cannot tap into our own languages as sources of knowledge, we'll still be discussing the very same thing for some time. Because language, especially for African languages, I'll speak of that. African languages are still untapped knowledge when it comes to redefining things in our society and recategorizing our society. Because we are still working with the categories and definitions that have been taken from somewhere. Once we start redefining and recategorizing through our own language, then we might see that certain things are not really issues when you translate them in the vernacular. Thank you very much. Which one?
We had a question on like whether we see the problem as men or is it the system itself that's problematic. To what then is the role of men? Sorry, do we want to hear the position of men on issues of feminism, of patriarchy?
Okay, in any cause, whether you term it human rights or justice, no one needs to be invited. If your principles as a human being are driven by the greater goal, you need to be involved in that particular thing. You don't need to be invited, whether as a man or a gay man or whatever. There is something that, first of all, we need to understand that the struggle is not a matter of what you read in the classroom. People don't struggle because of ideas. People don't go because they read Karl Marx and be like, ooh. People struggle because of their own socio-economic condition. There's no one who wakes up and be like, I like Marx because there is a condition in which people want to change. So ideas, in as much as we like hearing our own voices here and talk about ideas, for people who are actually experiencing these problems, it's not a luxury of a theoretical thing. It is their lives. So when you want to join as a man, why should you ask questions? There is a deeper, I don't know the English term for it. Your conviction. You have a conviction, just join in. You don't need acceptance or people to tick your thing. Because you believe that that is just wrong.
Thank you so much, Doc. Just before we move to you, Hlomela, I just want to ask if the register is circulating. I'm sorry that I'm asked. There we go. Thank you so much. Honorable.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. Yeah, I think a lot of things have been captured, and from what I gathered, more of it is comments and a few proposals and ideas being sought in. I think the one thing I've identified from our responses, one, we need to understand that we must stop pretending that society is some utopia and Mars or whatever. We are society. Every societal community is made out of people. And so if we're going to effectively bring the change we want, it starts with us. The second part is that we are very defensive as human beings. It's our nature. So when we speak and say there's patriarchy, we are not one in part. One, the male species stands up and say, but no, hold up. Are you fighting me or the system? Not an attack on you. When you speak about, and I'm going to speak about my struggle as a black female because that's what I am. And so it's not to suggest that a white female does not have any struggles, but we must also not be made to be apologetic for that which we are. So when we listen, it must not be from a point where we are ready to defend, but to understand the issue being brought forth. and how we can effectively contribute to either one, address that issue, or dismantle, or even challenge it, because it's not a position that you believe in. And so when you ask about the political arena scene of the gender quota, the reality is that in those instances, in those summits, in those constitutional processes, no one was thinking, and in fact that's why I said you must be careful who proposes it. When I went to the AGM, it was guys who were standing. Women were very quiet, we're sitting down as if we don't have a voice or we don't know what we want to say. So we need to be careful of who presents what stands to us. And politics, we're in that arena. We will always play political games that are favorable to us. But it's always ideal to understand, as any political party, you are there for the service and greater good of society. And that's why we always advocate that if DASO wins election, you're not going to serve DASO members. You're going to serve students. If SASCO wins elections, you're not there to serve SASCO members. But students must be served because you're elected to serve all members of society. And indeed, there's nothing attractive about politics for women. There's nothing attractive at all. And it's a constant battle that we're fighting. But the question is, how do we do it? How do we present that attractiveness as women? That incentive, what is to be incentivized, and how do we incentivize individuals? Because for me, the incentive before I got into politics has always been that I want to serve society. And so that's attractive to me, that I can be elected as a servant, not to occupy a position of power. Because that's where also a problem comes in. Because I'm seeing that politics, it's a profession, I'm occupying a position of power, and I forget that I'm actually there to serve society. That's a fundamental problem today. We are not servants anymore. I'm there to chow, and because if I speak a lot of rhetoric, I will make it, and that's fine. And even in these spaces, by the way, we do that. We want to outsmart one another. And I ask, how many of you have ever read a book on the topic today? How many of us have actually interrogated what we ought to speak about? But because I have a particular opinion, I want to expose the intellectual bankruptcy of Bucwa, and I must arise. Then we never get to pinpoint the fundamental issue. And so for me, I don't want to diverge, but I agree fundamentally that we need to educate and learn as a society. We really need that curricular development. Because in fact, we'll even expose some of the calls that we're making, because we'll understand that we don't know what this colonization thing means. Hey, but when I spoke decolonization, I didn't want to start, you know what. And so I agree with you that it needs to be presented, but I plead with you that we do not find ourselves again with a situation where we are fed a certain idea of what we are made to believe, and people are telling us what is our history, and we ourselves are not coming forth with it. Sure, thanks.
Right. All right. Unfortunately, I need to close it off. I do hope that the attendance register is circulating. I also just want to, just as a side note, tomorrow we are launching The Spirit of Magoqwana, The Rise of Insurgent Unionism in South Africa. That will be taking place at the Mission Vale Conference Center at 6 o'clock. There will be transport to return from the venue if you will need it. So please do. Kindly remember to RSVP, same RSVP details as this event. Okay, I'd now like to welcome Professor Andre Kiet. Here.
Hello everybody, I'm going to be thank you for the massive education to the panel here, and of course to the audience. Honorable Hlomela, lovely, Dr. B, as always, Sibukazi, thanks for pulling everything together, and of course our interim student leadership for welcoming us all here, and the fantastic questions, very, very deep issues raised. I found it highly self-reflexive, especially from women themselves, and apart from one of the contributions there around the issue of producing space, not only about occupying or being given space, but I think and genuinely believe that there is a different kind of space of a higher type of value and quality that women should and can and are providing society. So thank you once again for joining us. Are they invited to a little snack? Yeah. Okay. And of course, again to the host Institute, Conrad, and the team, Sibukazi in particular, for pulling this off. Thank you very much.